leading light in the subject of revolutionary movements and subversive activities, wrote this book, Fire in the Minds of Men. This individual is no less than the leading scholar involved in the Library of Congress, a fantastic historian who specialized in subversive movements. He writes in his book, The Fire in the Minds of Men, The Origins of the Revolutionary Faith. He writes, the plain fact is that by the mid-1810s, there were not just one or two, but scores of secret societies and revolutionary organizations throughout Europe, extending even into Latin America and the Middle East. And it was they who, in the process of modernization, pioneered a phenomena by now familiar: impatient youth forming their own organizations to combat the monarchical religious authority. The story of secret societies can never be fully reconstructed, but it has been badly neglected, even avoided, one suspects, because the evidence that is available repeatedly leads one into the territory equally uncongenial to modern historians in the East and in the West. Now, J. Edgar Hoover, crazy as he was, said one thing that is interesting. He said, the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous that he cannot believe it exists. And this is very accurate, because here we are, stressed out, overworked, underpaid. We've got so much going on in our domestic lives that we really don't have the time for anything more than sound bites. Now, I don't know, though, whether some of you are still misinformed enough or even naive enough to not realize that there is something very seriously wrong in the world today politically, not just in America and the West, but throughout the entire world. And we better know that, because we have to know what the problems are before we can even hope to arrive at the solutions. When one looks, as we've been doing, at the statements of those who do know that there is something going on, we also find their statements that there is a conspiracy, coupled with the fact that it is our own gullibility, our own complicity that is maintaining this status quo. Now, as a teacher, I'm constantly coming across people who aggressively and even indignantly get up in the face and say, there's no such thing as a conspiracy, a worldwide conspiracy with secret societies moving. This new flatline mentality can best be summed up as, if I don't see it happening in my life, then it doesn't exist. So if it's invisible to you, then obviously it doesn't exist. Now, if we go to the third world, in comparison to this, if we go to those who live in Africa, if we go to those who live in, East Timor or Cambodia, if we go to those who live near the Amazon, who when they pull their shutters, aside every morning, they see their beautiful land, their jungle being torn to shreds by Western corporations, they are not in any doubt that there's a big brother operating in the world. This denial is a luxury that we have in Middle America or in the world. It's a luxury we can still at this time afford. But what really gets me is that even on a more domestic and lower level, there are still conspiracies, quote unquote, happening before our eyes. Ones that can be handled very easily and yet are not handled. For instance, there is legal and constitutional protection against the corporate involvement and the corporate takeover of government. These edicts and these legislations have long been in power, and yet what gets done? Almost next to nothing. The corporate, even in this present administration, the corporate involvement in politics is obvious. The whole swing door attitude is very much obvious to us if we look. We have high-level members of government who have corporate connections, becoming part of the government, taking senior ranks so that they can further the agenda of their corporate buddies and their corporations, and then quickly exiting when they've done their job and moving straight back into the corporate world. Here we have in the 2004 George Bush election, we have half the cabinet resigning after he gets into power. Now wait a minute, what happens? What is all this about? The election takes place, nobody speaks a word of any resignations. They get Bush back into power, and then half the cabinet suddenly resign. Where have we ever heard of such a thing? Why are they resigning, and what for? It is understood when we realize how the corporate entity works. And that's just a low-level, normal, in-your-face conspiracy that there's plenty of legislation in the world, more than enough legislation to deal with, and yet nobody deals with it. it carries on as if nothing ever happened.